When you're in a community, a big community, everybody feels, well, next person also can do it, and this one can do it. We can all, if everybody sort of does their bit. But when you're in a smaller community, as a few people, you feel you've got to do more because they rely upon you.
Do you ever meet people in life and think to yourself, how are they so happy? Well, Rabbi David Freilich lives in one of the most remote places in the world, and his community is probably the most excommunicated community. They barely have any contact with outsiders. You'll hear more about them, and they're very friendly people. There's a lack of connection because of geographically where they are. But you'll hear more about that. And he kind of uses his simchas achayim to help his community. I think he's like the ideal community rav. He sheds many tears about a few topics we talk about, and he talks about being a chazan and how important it is to him. I realized last week when we interviewed Penny Taub, there was a question that a lot of people are asking after, what happened to the abuser of Penny? So we're going to talk about that at the end of this episode and why it was left out, but I'll reveal as much as I can. In this episode, you will hear my favorite clothing brand, Twillery, rocking their blazer right now, rocking their pants and their socks. And you'll also hear about two podcasts that you're watching this, you're listening to this. That means you're a podcast lover and you're going to love these two podcasts. One, Good Faith Effort podcast, and two, the Kiddush Club podcast, where I was featured on a while ago. But, oh my gosh, such a fun time. And you're also going to hear about the book that I finished by Rosh Hashanah davening. True story. Okay, it's called Beginnings. It makes sense because I was reading on Rosh Hashanah, but nothing particularly to do with Rosh Hashanah. You'll hear more about that. Here is my conversation with Rabbi David Freilich. I'm Yaakov Langer, and you're listening to Inspiration for the Nation. Here I am today with Rabbi Freilich, all the way from Australia, and you are by far the most distant person that I've ever had an interview with. Exactly where in Australia do you live?
Firstly, when you say distant, I hope you mean distant geographically.
No, I feel like you're like my uncle or like grandfather. I feel very close to you.
Well, Australia is quite a way away. It took us about 28 hours to get here.
That's a lot,
actually. And where I come from, Western Australia, Perth, is the most isolated Jewish community in the world. But that has its advantages. I mean, you got Melbourne and Sydney. When I say to people I'm from Australia, they say, where? Melbourne or Sydney? I said, no, Perth. And they get a big shock. They said, Jews in Perth? I said, well, what am I?
That's all right. I researched it, and it happens to be a lot of people, even in Melbourne or Sydney, they don't even know what Perth is a lot of times. Like, maybe they've heard of it, but not everyone.
Well, I'm originally from Sydney. So when I was offered the position to be the rabbi in Perth, I said, what's in Perth? I never heard of the Jewish community in Perth. I knew there was one, but very, very small. And I was pleasantly surprised when I went there, because although at that stage actually it was growing, because a lot of South Africans were coming to Perth, because it's very similar lifestyle to South Africa. There's people leaving South Africa, they were coming to Perth. So it was at that stage the fastest Jewish community in the world. Really, I mean, it was a small community, but it was growing very quickly. In fact, so much so that we had to advance the facilities there, and it was really very exciting. It's stopped now a bit because there's less people coming from South Africa at the moment, because financially it's very hard for them, because the rand compared to the dollar. But
what's it called?
The South African rand.
Rand?
Yeah.
I don't know anything about currency.
So economically, it's harder for them to come out now. So that influx has stopped. But generally, in Australia altogether, there's about 120, 130,000 Jewish people, mainly Melbourne, which is a fantastic community, Sydney, and Perth is the third largest Jewish community with about 8,000.
Okay, and we'll talk about how you're Chief Rabbi of Perth for so many years, but I want to take me back to your upbringing. You grew up in Sydney.
Brought up in Sydney,
and I read you were like coming more from like a traditional background.
Traditional background. I tell you, my grandparents actually came from Poland. They were from Galicia, actually, from Lemberg and Lesko. And they actually left. They were thrown out of their homes because they had Zionist leanings. My grandfather was actually started the Zionist movement in Australia. My grandfather was from Bobova Hasidim. My grandmother was from Belzer Hasidim, and they actually met at a Zionist meetings at that time because they believed we had to have Eretz Yisrael. It was the only way that can save us. We had needed our own homeland. So, of course, their parents, very Hasidish, did not
did not approve of that.
Approve of that. So as a result, they actually had to leave, and they eloped, and they went to Vienna, where my father was born, and my uncles. And so they went to Vienna, and they were married in Vienna, in the Yiddish shul in Vienna. And then my grandfather saw there was a lot of anti-Semitism coming in Austria as well. So they actually wanted to get out of there, and they went to Australia via New Zealand. Because they couldn't even get into Australia at that time, but via New Zealand, they came to Australia.
Why would they go to Australia?
Why Australia? Because they couldn't get anywhere else. They had the opportunity to go to Australia, and they actually settled in Sydney. Now, when I was born, they were traditional. They'd shed a lot of their Hasidic background. They were traditional, like Shabbos, Kashrus. But Kashrus in that time was very different in Sydney. It's not like you have today, you have
the OU.
No. You just went to the counter and say, "Oh, there's no gelatine in this."
Right.
Throughout Australia,
I don't see any pork. Right.
Yeah, exactly. No gelatine in this one. That's fine. It was very different. Mm-hmm. Now it's very commercialized.
Right.
Then it wasn't. So that was traditional. If you went to the shelves and you looked at the package to see, and Shabbos they kept. And it's just traditional background, but they'd shed everything they had in Europe because they had to sort of start a new life there in Australia. It was similar with a lot of people. In fact, let me tell you that in Melbourne, I think it was the biggest population of Holocaust survivors outside Israel in the world. And
really?
a lot of these people came from very Hasidic backgrounds. I mean, it's more of a Hasidic community now in Melbourne, but many of them actually shed a lot of what they knew and brought up in their own homes in Europe.
Wow. Okay. So you grew up in a traditional home. Obviously, Shabbos and kashrus was important, but as of I know you're not a label person, but as of today, you're an Orthodox person. When did that transition happen? Was it quickly? Was it slowly? Was it in college?
No, I just thought when I became bar mitzvah, I said when I said the words Asher b'chavonu mikol ha'amim, Hashem chose us and He gave us His Torah, I actually wanted to mean it in a very strong way, that commitment. So I took it on myself more than my parents. I just felt I wanted to fulfill what I was saying from the Torah. So just an inner feeling that I wanted to do this. Let me say this to you though, that my parents, my father, sent us to yeshiva, which is very interesting because we went to it's what you call a public school here. It was actually a private school, non-Jewish private school, Sydney Grammar School, which was a very sort of posh school. Me and my brothers, and every afternoon my father would send us to yeshiva. There was a yeshiva there. Actually, at that stage, it was run by Gera Hasidim. It was a very small yeshiva. Not many people from Sydney went there. There were a few traditional families that went there, but and my parents didn't speak Yiddish at home, so. But in the yeshiva there, they were translating from the Chumash into Yiddish. So there was one language I couldn't understand to another language I couldn't understand. But the feeling there, and my father said to me, "I'm sending you here because that is real Judaism. That is what my father was used to in Europe from my great grandfather, and that's what I want you to be. That's the true spirit of Yiddishkeit." So my father actually encouraged me to advance more than they did. Because after all, it's difficult for them. When they came to Australia, they had to get settled. It was, in fact, my great grandfather virtually wanted to say Kaddish when he heard his son and his grandchildren were going to Australia. What's going to happen to them? But Baruch Hashem, if my great grandfather was looking down at me now, I would say he's getting nachas. We didn't end the line, even though we went to Australia, the furthest Jewish community in the world.
Wow. Okay. So I want to fast forward to you being the chief rabbi, and there's been obviously a lot of growth in Perth, and a lot of it is due to you and your wife and your family.
No, I don't say that. I say it's due to the community.
Okay.
No, not me. I mean, I was privileged and honored to be able to teach Torah. I love teaching Torah, but it really is not. It's not me doing it. It's because the people themselves wanted to be a bit more involved. Got it.
So could you describe to us what it's like to be in the most remote from community in the world, and what that's like?
Feels good.
Yeah?
Yes.
I would be scared. I'm like used to Flatbush, which is like probably the opposite.
Well, I think being in a community where you're so isolated and you're really in the minority, you actually...
It's the most isolated.
Yeah.
You don't... Absolutely. No one even compares to Perth.
Oh, I love it. You actually punch above your weight. Everybody there feels, because we are so isolated and because we are so few, you feel you've got to do more to ensure that Yiddishkeit is strengthened and survives there. So it does have its advantages. When you're in a community, a big community, everybody feels, well, next person also can do it, and this one can do it. We can all, everybody sort of does their bit. But when you're in a smaller community, as a few people, you feel you've got to do more because they rely upon you. They rely upon you, to go to a minyan. If you don't go, there'll be no minyan. People won't be able to say Kaddish. So everybody feels they've got to do more. So it's not so. I find it actually quite exhilarating.
Well, what are the challenges of being out in Perth as the rabbi?
The kosher facilities, actually. Here in New York, you have so many wonderful restaurants and you're able to go and eat out.
It's easy. It's literally easy.
Yeah. In Perth, that's hard. That's hard because we've got one little place where we can go. Actually, there's now a takeaway place as well, but it's difficult because it's and not everybody eats out every night. So therefore, these facilities usually close down because there's nobody to actually
can't be sustained.
Yeah. So anyway, that's the most difficult part. We have all the other facilities. We've got shuls, good shuls. We've got mikveh. We've got a mikveh there, wonderful mikveh. We've got you name it. All the facilities needed for a proper Jewish life.
But I'm asking you personally, as a Rav, like what challenges did you have being out in Perth and like trying to help the community and stuff like that?
To be truthful, I didn't find any challenges.
Really?
Absolutely. In fact, I told you I found it exhilarating because you actually felt that you're there and you're actually helping a community. And although the community is not big, it still has the facilities, and you are, you feel special. It's like a big fish in a small fish, or big fish in a small pond.
Wow, I hear that. So for me personally, the first time I heard of Perth was with a very unfortunate accident that happened with Avinoam Grossman AH. He went out to seed there. Could you tell us about, I guess, that experience and how it impacted the community as a whole?
Well, let me tell you, Avinoam Grossman was the most wonderful, wonderful young man. Not only, I get quite tearful, not only did he exemplify Torah in spirit, but, in letter and in spirit, he showed what Torah really meant. And he had a great impact on a number of the young people there. So when you mention him, I get very, very emotional.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I could see.
And, there was a group of them who came from Seed. Dovi Saphir, who actually led them. They did marvelous work in Perth. And that really was a great help to me as well, because actually it was the first time that, you had Litvisher young men coming to Perth. I mean, you have Chabad, etc. But these were Litvisher young men who cared about the community. They didn't want anything from the community. They gave to the community. Too often people come to small communities and they're there, sadly, to take, but they came to give.
But for someone who doesn't really know what Seed is, they would say, okay, what exactly is Seed? They're coming to a community for maybe a month. Okay, it's just a month. How could that really impact a community or people's lives for
I'll tell you, because these young people see these young men who care about them, spiritually care about them, and interact with them, and they see, look, you could be still a young man and in the modern world, but you can be a Torah observant person at the same time. So this was an example. It was a role model to people in Perth, especially to the young people in Perth. It was fantastic. So Avinoam Grossman, I must tell you, his impact was really great because he was such a mensch. Anyway, so and we will never forget him in Perth. Although he may not be with us physically, but spiritually, his impact will go on forever.
That's really beautiful. We'll be right back to this week's episode, but first, let me tell you a little story about what happened to me on Rosh Hashanah. After davening, my Rav, because I davened in the White Shul for Rosh Hashanah, Rav Mati Neuberger came over to me. He's like, you have like a whole library over there. What are you reading? And I said, listen, I tried getting into davening, and I did. It was amazing, beautiful davening. But there was a few books that I brought along, Svarim, and one of them, Beginnings, I have the exact title, Beginnings, The Kabbalistic History of Civilization by Rabbi Yaakov Haber. I have never in my life finished a book cover to cover. It's not a particularly long book, but it was fascinating. It is a book about, I didn't go into all this, explain to Rabbi Neuberger, maybe if he's listening to this episode, he'll see, but it goes into the early civilizations and the people from Bereshis. It gives you such an in-depth description on who they are from like a DNA level. Who was like Cain and Hevel? Like, what did they represent, and how is that represented in Yaakov and Esav? There's a connection there, and the birth of David through Lot and his daughters, and how Eliezer really wanted to marry into Avram's family, and why Avram really did not let that, but he allowed into a family that's related but seemed pretty shady. It goes through it, and there's a few moments in the book, I kid you not, during davening, maybe it's like the davening helped it, and I'm like, I need to think about this. This is life transforming. So if you want to get out of your third, fourth grade level of Bereshis, of like what's really going on, and to read a really concise, awesome description of the people who started civilization / Judaism, then go ahead and get Beginnings. But not just that, if you go to mosaicpress.com and you put in the code L'chaim, you're going to get 18% off the book. I mean, it's already a well-priced book. So you're going to get 18% off. Go ahead. Please use our code, because when you use our codes, then our sponsors say, hey, that's awesome. Let's sponsor more. I kid you not, one of my favorite books that I read, I said in the past year, but the people are like, oh, since Rosh Hashanah? No. Okay, my favorite book that I read in the past 365 days is one of the top 5 for sure. So go ahead and pick up the Beginnings book. You can also find it in any local, say, supermarket, which you can't, but you can find it in any local bookstore. Now back to my conversation with Rabbi Freilich. You're definitely one of the most unique people I've met. I've heard that you're, on Shabbos, you're wearing a bekasha, and at the same time you have a dog. It's a very interesting fuse. But then there's more interesting than that is that you played rugby. I don't know how many Rabbanim I know that used to play rugby, and you've come out with like a pop album about just
philosophy.
Yeah, philosophy, exactly. These are interesting things to me, so I want to go through it. First of all, I don't even know what rugby is. Is that the polo? Like, no, is that something else?
No polo.
Okay.
No, this rugby is very similar to your football here, actually.
Oh, okay, that's what it is.
Very similar. It's I played rugby at school, And I couldn't play rugby actually in the main team because that played on Shabbos. I thought I went to a non-Jewish school.
Right.
So they played rugby on Shabbos. But during the week they had competition, and I played, and I really enjoyed it. And I still follow rugby. I follow the teams, etc. But I don't actually play.
I can't even name one rugby team. Which team do you go for? I don't even know one team.
Well, there's the Waratahs, the New South Wales team. Next time you go onto Google, look, Waratahs, they're a good team. That's the New South Wales team. So generally, rugby is very similar to your, what do you call it, gridiron? Gridiron, you call it here? I don't know what you call it here.
Where?
In America, gridiron?
I don't even know.
When they throw the ball. I don't know.
Football?
Yes, football. Yeah, football. Okay.
Yeah, I should have worn like a rugby team shirt to this interview. I think that would have been.
But I learned that at school. So they played it at school. Most schools do play some sort of football. So that's why I always enjoyed it, and it's I enjoyed I enjoyed the challenge of playing in a team sport.
And what about the music? What brought you to put out an album?
Well, music, see, I was actually in the 60s. Now, although I was an observant Jew, I still was in the normal society. I went to, university and I was a great Beatles fan. For the Beatles at that time.
The Beatles, I know. I've heard of them.
Yeah, the Beatles. So I was a great Beatles fan. Mm-hmm. And I always used to like their music. Because they had, some of their music is very philosophical as well. So I decided when I retired from the rabbinate, I was going to make some songs which also have a philosophical background to them and a philosophical message. So I actually made an album called Earthly Haze. It's on Spotify. And I played it for some of my congregants in Perth, and they said, "Rabbi, that's all your droshes." Because I put it over in a pop style about things about Hashem, and we should look after His world, and we should many of those themes which unfortunately today are ignored. Respect for each other. Looking at the Tselem Elokim, the image of God in each and every individual. So these are the themes I sort of put into this album. So I felt good about it. I did something which I wanted to do since the age of 18.
Wow. So it goes in par with I heard an incredible chazan, and different than maybe a lot of chazanim are like beautiful, but with you, I've heard that your chazanus is very emotional.
Gee, you've actually picked up a lot about me. Yeah, I get when I'm praying to Hashem, I get very emotional. I don't know what it is. I just cry. My neshama. I actually get tearful now.
Oh, yeah,
as I'm talking to you, that's can't help it.
But I'm curious, what's evoking that emotion now? Why are you getting so emotional when we're talking about talking to Hashem?
Because when you're talking to Hashem, and actually you're praying as a rabbi very often on behalf of your kehillah as well, and they all have their needs, and they all have their desires in life for their families, etc. Sorry, and you're the shliach tzibur on their behalf, because many of them can't have it. You feel a great emotion. You feel, are you worthy to actually pray on their behalf to Hashem? You feel unworthiness yourself.
Wow, that is really beautiful. I came across a 1978 obituary where you wrote about Rev Gedalia Hertz. He seems to have been a great influence on you. Could you talk to us about who he was and his impact? Well,
I mentioned before my father sent me and my brothers to yeshiva after the non-Jewish school, Sydney Grammar School we used to go to. We used to go to yeshiva in the afternoons. He was the Rosh Yeshiva at that time. He was actually a Gera Chosid. And to me and my brothers, who came from the traditional background, and seeing him, Gedalia Hertz, who was Hasidic rabbi there. It was very unusual in Sydney at that time. It actually gave me the warmth and the vibrancy of Hasidus, which has a great impact on me. And in fact, he eventually left Sydney and became the Rosh Yeshiva Chidushei Harim in Tel Aviv, which is one of the main Gera yeshivas. And I actually got a smicha from him as well. That was years later.
Wow. Okay. So moving on, then you, I have over here, you won a prize for Talmud in 1972.
Yeah,
from the Chief Rabbi in England.
In Jews College London, yes.
Yeah.
I studied in Jews College London, the same place as Jonathan Sacks, actually.
Yes, which before we started this interview, I said you kind of look like him a little. Is that, do all Jews College people look alike?
Like this.
So you knew him.
Very, very well. Very, very well. Became very friendly with him. He actually started in Jews College after me. We had the same teachers, Rabbi Nachum Rabinovich, who was the principal of Jews College. So we had the same teachers, same mentors. And I left just before him for the simple reason that he studied in Cambridge, Jonathan Sacks, for philosophy for a number of years. So he started just the year I left, actually, when I went back to Australia. And people were saying to me, oh, there's this brilliant student who started at Jews College. Brilliant. And then for the 100th anniversary of my congregation in Perth, he came over. We invited him over to address the community there. So we met up, and I mentioned there, I heard about you when I left Jews College, etc. We have the same teachers. So I came very close to him. But I didn't realize coming close to him, I looked like him.
I don't know. Maybe it's a more recent thing. I don't know if
but
20 years ago.
I must say he's had a tremendous impact on the Jewish, not the Jewish world, the whole world,
right?
Actually,
right.
So he's been tremendous, and I admire that because I believe that as Jews and as the chosen. What we're chosen for, to set an example to the rest of the world. So he did set an example to the rest of the world by his teachings and by his philosophy, and showing that Judaism has so much to offer to the world in general.
I also know you studied by Rav Nachum David Herman. What was that like?
Wonderful. He may be known in America, so I studied with him when I went to Israel, and I studied. So I got rabbinical qualifications both in London and in Israel. So I studied with him in Israel for my rabbinical qualifications there. So he was wonderful. Also I wanted to get smichas from all types of rabbinical backgrounds. So Jews College, which was more modern Orthodox. I also got from Rabbi Xander Hertz, who was Hasidic. I got from Nachum David Herman, who was Litvish. So I wanted to sort of have the backgrounds from all rabbinical backgrounds.
You're like a melting pot of so many different worlds, because you have the Hasidic worlds from your.
I wanted to all of it, all of the various backgrounds, so I could communicate and connect with all backgrounds.
It's interesting because I think that worked out, because in Perth, the exposure to the outside world is so limited. So imagine you just went in with just a bells background, then all of a sudden, it was okay, it's just bells, but you pulled.
I had all backgrounds. That's why when I got my smichas, I wanted from all backgrounds.
Wow. Did you at any point in your life, you or your wife, your family, think like, okay, maybe Perth is nice, it's a good idea, but it's getting hard. It's getting too hard.
No, we're still in Perth. I've been retired now for 3-4 years. We're still in Perth.
Wow.
We've got our my eldest daughter and her family there in Perth. If they were to leave to go to the eastern states, Melbourne or Sydney, we would leave, because I think now it depends where family is. That's where you live. But we're very happy in Perth. We've said all the facilities are there. I've still actually, by the way, give a shiur and teach Torah. Every week I give a drosha. But I now go to we've started a new Sephardi minyan there called Sasson. So I actually go and I give every Shabbos a shir and a Devar Torah there. And I always say before I start, I said, I'm not talking to you as a rabbi. I'm no longer an official rabbi. I'm talking to you as a fellow Jew, sharing Torah with you. So I don't want to be sort of regarded as an official rabbi anymore. And in fact, I think that's better, to be quite frank with you.
Hold on. So when I name this interview, you don't want me to say rabbi, etc., etc.?
No, I to be quite frank with you, even when I was rabbi, I very rarely...
you don't want to be. Why? Why?
Well, no, I mean, to be quite frank with you, I just find it a little pretentious. I find it pretentious. Whenever I sign a letter, I never said Rabbi David Freilich or Rabbi David Freilich. I never said that. When I was writing to the government or something and I wanted to help somebody, I would say it because I would want to know I've got an official title, so it'll help the person. But whenever I signed a letter, I just said David Freilich. So I never really, even when I was officially a rabbi, I didn't want it to be.
So I could relate to you in the way that, like, when I was in yeshiva, when I got married and I was still learning yeshiva, they referred to me like on a list, I'm an avrich. So they said Rabbi Yaakov Langer. And I'm like, I'm not a rabbi, but you literally were a rabbi though.
Yes, I was a rabbi, but I didn't, it's unimportant to me, the title. It's unimportant. It's what a rabbi does. And that's teach Torah, inspire, make, and particularly in Perth, to show that the Torah is relevant to their lives. But you do that as a fellow Jew anyway. As a fellow Jew, you should do that anyway. So why do you need to put the title rabbi in front of you? Well, that was a rabbi, but it's not an important feature. In fact, I get quite, what's the word, frustrated when I see rabbis always say, rabbi this and rabbi that, signing off like that. I don't know why they have to do that.
I'm the opposite. When my Rosh Yeshiva calls me, he's Rav Chaim Tzvi Center. He called me. He's like, "Hi, it's Chaim Tzvi Center. Is Yaakov there?" I'm like, "Okay." To me, you're the Rosh Yeshiva. Like, it's weird to call you.
Oh no, people don't call me David Freilich.
Okay,
but I myself
refer to yourself.
Will not refer to myself as rabbi.
Got it. That makes sense.
You understand that?
Yeah.
Because I find it pretentious. It's as simple as that. But people call me rabbi. I don't say, don't call me rabbi.
Right. I hear that. One of the most powerful moments in this episode is coming up. A lot of tears, a lot of tissues, and not because, whatever, I don't want to spoil it. But, okay, before we get to that, I have been getting questions very often about my new drip, as the kids call it. They don't call it that. Oh, good. Bacher is he's gonna destroy me. But the new clothing that I have is sponsored by Twillory. Twillory.com is your place to not only look good, but feel good. Feel good because you feel like a mensch, but feel good also because you're gonna be buying clothing that lasts you for a lot longer than typical, and also has this like cool material that you don't feel hot and sweaty in your clothing. So whether you're buying their amazing undershirts, their amazing polos or button downs, or right now I'm rocking their blazer, which, by the way, I don't know if you've noticed, I've been looking a lot more spiffy because I'm rocking their clothing. But on Rosh Hashanah, I was wearing their suit, which this happens to be the blazer for it. I was wearing a gray suit. This is the blazer in blue, whatever. Either way, my suit was so comfortable, I literally felt like I was wearing pajamas. So yes, it doesn't look like you're wearing tuxedo. Yes, it looks like a beautiful, gorgeous suit, and it's well priced for the amount of time that it's going to last you, and it's a brand new suit. So you want suits, you want shirts, you want pants that last me at least for over 5 years. I just put in another order because I'm ordering a lot more pants, because this is my pants, it's my go-to. I feel good, I can stretch, I can run. So if you enjoy good clothing, go to Twillory.com and use our code INSPIRE for $18 off when you spend over $139 for new customers only. And go ahead and try them out. They are amazing. Oh, what size am I? You can find it online, but if you can't, I tell you, order as much as you can and you can return it. The shipping is so easy, so simple. Send a return label, it's in the box, you put it back in the box, bada bing, bada boom. Okay, now back to my conversation with the rabbi. Is there like a secret sauce to getting congregants in, I guess, any community, but let's say your community, to fall more in love with Hashem or just Jewish people or Torah?
I think the way a person behaves, the way an observant person behaves, to show that you are a good human being, you are a decent human being. In other words, you behave with courtesy to others, etc., and you keep Shabbos, and you still keep Shabbos and kashrus, etc. If you show that you are, as I said, an honest, good person, and at the same time you are an observant person, then they start to respect Torah more, because they say, look, he's a good person. When you have a situation where you've got people who are observant of Torah but show no respect for others, no matter what background, they just because they mightn't be observant, they've shown no respect for them, then people unfortunately turn off. They say, this is how they behave. You see, you've got to show that synthesis of observance and menschlichkeit. And if you show that, then people say, this way of life means something. This way of life is something to emulate. So that's what I've tried to show by example.
I love the fusion of those two ideas, because I think either side gets me personally, just like very annoyed when you see like someone that he's a Talmid Chacham and knows a lot of Torah, but he's not acting like a mensch. He's in public and like being rude and like that's one. And then the reverse of someone who's they're very nice, they're mensch, but they're like, okay, but is Torah really important? And it's like, yes, of course. Either side, it's like it's missing something very important.
Well, I'm always reminded of the word, I've forgotten where I read this. As one Rosh Yeshiva, the student came to him and he said, I've been to the whole of Shas. I've been to the whole of Shas. And he said, but has Shas been through you? That's it. You can say, be a big Talmid Chacham, you can know the whole of Shas, but has Shas been through you to actually make you a mensch and a good human being? Now, if that is the case, then you can influence others. So that's what I believe.
It's really nice. So the next thing I want to talk about is probably uncomfortable, but I think it's important. And we could obviously take this part out if you don't want to talk about it. But I was very impressed with in around 2012 when you stood up for people that were sexually abused. Could you tell us about, I guess, what happened and what made you come out and stand up?
It's interesting. You read about that. I was the president at that stage of the Orthodox Rabbis of Australia. And one Shabbos morning, somebody comes into shul and they said they read in the paper in Melbourne that there was sexual abuse in one of the schools there. And it was a big article there, and they were saying, the paper actually said that they shouldn't be actually talking about this. They were not going to talk about this because they can't put their fellow Jews in, etc. People were being quiet about it. And I thought about this, and as being the president of the rabbinate at the time, I said, something has to be said immediately regarding this. So I actually, the Sunday after Shabbos, I said, I'm not going to let another newspaper go past in Australia without me as the president of the rabbis saying something about this. So I wrote a statement. My wife's a lawyer, so I wanted to make sure I was.
She's actually sitting in the room over here behind the camera. Yeah. So, Rebbetzin, you read it? Yeah, she read it. Okay.
I checked anything like this. I have checked with her first.
I hope the hours that she billed you wasn't too bad.
No, she gave it to me free.
Oh, wow. Nice. Wow, perks.
So I actually wrote and I said, anybody who has been abused should go right to the police. And I said, and those who have covered it up should also be equally liable in the eyes of the law. So I put that out. And of course, the general public were very. They actually when they saw that statement from the president of the rabbis, it impressed them, because I wanted to show we don't cover these things up.
Right.
We don't cover these things up. So I actually came up with a statement far greater than any of the other religious leaders of the other denominations. So what happened was a few of my colleagues, I'm not going to say from which sect of our, who of course were part of this school, and who the school was under, and were on the executive of the Rabbinical Council, phoned me up and said to me, I had no right to say this. So I said, well, what else can be said? That is the right statement.
Why were they against that? Because they're saying, what, you're making Jews look bad?
I think it was, yes. Well, no, I think it was a protection of their school.
So they didn't want it to.
They didn't want to be out.
But your response was like, I care about the MS.
Correct. I care about the MS. And I care about the kids. Mm-hmm. So what happened was, when I saw this backlash from colleagues, I resigned as president. I said, I cannot be president of the Association of Rabbis with people who seemingly believe that it should be covered up. So I stepped down. And then that actually got into the general press as well, that I'd stepped down because of this situation. No, it was a very difficult time. I stood up for what I believed in this regard, that those who covered it up were equally responsible. Because when you cover it up, it just causes it to go further.
I think what you did started some form of a wave of people just speaking out, because as we're doing this, like I was like looking at it, and I'm like today's day and age, it's like, of course you speak out, like, of course.
Well, of course. But, I mean, the fact is, Dina de Malchus Dina, it's the law of the land to speak out anyway on this, right, on these issues. I mean, you know, if you look at halacha on this, most, you know, if you look at what halacha says on this, you definitely speak out on such things.
Right. Okay. Many years ago, I had the privilege of being on the Kiddush Club podcast. And this podcast is different than most Jewish podcasts, because I think there's maybe some others, but I don't think anyone who does it as well as them. Kiddush Club podcast is a fun podcast. When you come to Living L'Chaim, when you come to like Kosher Money, there's a mission here. We want to help you live a happier life when it comes to finances, to understand money, understand why Hashem made money, how to operate money, miser, hedge funds, making billions. There's a goal there, or inspiration. We want you to walk out trying to make an impact on the world, or that's an issue, mental health. Fine, there's a place and time for that. But there's also a place and time for fun. Something that Living L'Chaim lacks is a podcast where it just gives you a fun time. Kiddush Club podcast, the people who host it, two fellows that remain anonymous. The world is trying to guess who they are. I don't know, maybe it's Bruce Wayne and Clark Kent, but it's two very funny people that you listen to their podcast, and it's a fun time. It's kosher. It's literally kosher entertainment. When people say Living L'Chaim is kosher entertainment, I'm like, listen, I think we're a form of entertainment, but we're, I guess, educational and we're inspirational. We're not entertainment per se. That's what Kiddush Club podcast is. They're a fun time. They're good. And we have in the works something. We're working on something together, but you'll hear more about that later. But I encourage you to the most strong degree to go ahead and listen to one of the episodes. They are very diverse. They choose very fun topics. They have fun guests. Not every episode's a guest. They have that dynamic. It should be them two talking about the news, what's happening from a Jewish perspective. They're hilarious. Go ahead and wherever you find podcasts, Apple, Spotify, etc. Google Podcasts is coming to end. I don't know if anyone knew that. But either way, go ahead and catch Kiddush Club Podcast. You will not regret it. Now, I need to tell you about another podcast. Again, you guys love podcasts, I hope. That's why you're watching or listening to this. So now let me tell you about the latest episode on the Good Faith Effort podcast, which you've heard me talk about them before, but particularly I have 21 minutes left of this episode. Incredible. Let me read you the show notes. On today's episode, Ari. It says Ari. I'm going to call him Reb Ari because that's who he is. Reb Ari spoke with the best-selling author and historian of English and American history, Nick Bunker, about the Mayflower Pilgrims and how the Hebrew intellectual and religious tradition shaped their world and ultimately birthed the United States of America. Along the way, they talk about Nick, a Roman Catholic from London. See, it's already very different from us. How he spent his most formative years immersed in the Jewish community of the Upper West Side of Manhattan. The importance of King James I, the rise of the English interest in biblical Hebrew, the origins of the Puritans, why the Pilgrims were fascinated by the medieval Jewish scholar Maimonides, Nick's career in investment banking, and how it molded his work as a historian, and much more. This is a show, the Good Faith Effort podcast, that I look up to. There's not many shows I could say that I say, wow, they're doing a great job in the same space that we're doing. So love here, baby. So go ahead and check out the Good Faith Effort podcast, Google Podcast, which is coming to an end soon. So go ahead and check them out on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and wherever you listen to your podcasts. Go ahead and check out the Good Faith Effort podcast and go ahead and thank me later because we like to find the best podcast to share with you. And by the way, there's been a few other podcasts that came to me and say, hey, can I advertise? I listened to the show. I'm like, I didn't tell them no because you stink, but it's because they stink. So these are shows that I actually think are awesome. So go ahead and check them out. Now back to this week's episode. If there is one person in history who's no longer with us, who you could spend an hour with, who would you spend that hour with?
Who's no longer with us? I'll tell you, it would probably be Jonathan Sacks.
Really?
Yeah. Because, you know, I found him very inspirational.
Really?
Yeah, probably be Jonathan Sacks. I mean, you're talking about back Moshe Rabbeinu.
What do you even talk to Moshe Rabbeinu about? I think Rabbi Sacks would be easier conversation.
No. Moshe Rabbeinu, I don't know, I wouldn't do the talking.
Right, you just do the listening.
I just get the inspiration.
Is there one particular mitzvah as of today that you connect with more than the other mitzvahs?
All mitzvahs are important.
Of course.
All mitzvahs are equal. All mitzvahs are important. But the mitzvah that I must say that I really feel which I think embraces all of it, is the Ahavta L'Reacha Kamocha. You know, I do believe that is the main mitzvah because I believe the other mitzvahs are orientated towards that particular goal of the Ahavta L'Reacha Kamocha. Even Shabbos, because when you keep Shabbos and you're thinking to yourself on Shabbos, this is about creation, Hashem creating us all. It gives you a respect for your fellow human being as well, and a love for your fellow human being, because you think we're all being created by Hashem on Shabbos. You think that's why we're keeping Shabbos, and we rest on that day to remember Hashem's creation. So, and even kashrus, I'm not going into it now, even kashrus has that flow-on effect of v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha.
Tease us a little. What do you mean with the kashrus?
Well, you know, you actually, we have our dietary regulations, what we can eat, what we can't eat. You could say that could have many, we eat together and we eat certain things together. But not only that, we don't eat blood. We don't eat blood. Why is that? Because blood is you know, has a certain element to it. It's a life force. So that flows on, I believe, to understanding that every human being who has blood, virtually, you know, should be respected. Because we one of the main things of kashrus is to not have dam, and therefore to respect dam, respect the blood of every human being. So it flows on.
I never thought of kashrus and L'Ahavta L'Reacha Kamocha like that. That's really beautiful.
It's an idea. It's an idea. I think of things like this. So you get philosophical thoughts behind it.
Give me more. I like this. Give me more philosophical thoughts. That it's a general question, but I like. Give me more stuff like that. I like that.
You like that? Okay. Let me think of another example. Well, of course, shutness is also about v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha.
Why?
I mean, you know the background of that. We have of course, it's a chok, but you have a situation where when Chovel and Cain, when they fought, one brought flax, linen, etc. One brought wool. So when you have the idea of shutness, you think to yourself, I can't wear this because that caused the first dispute of those two elements in history. The first dispute was between when Cain killed Hevel. That was the first dispute based on linen and wool. So again, that leads one to understand even shutness. All of these actually lead us to respecting each other.
That's really nice. I like that. I have to come to like your sermons and speeches to get more. What's the worst advice someone ever gave you in your life?
What's the worst advice? I don't think I really cannot think of any bad advice.
You want to do what's the best advice someone gave you?
Yes, be a good yid.
Who gave that? Who gave that advice?
All my teachers. Everyone.
Wow. Okay, I'm going to ask you a question. It's going to be pretty random, and I don't know. It's definitely not. We're not in a shul setting. Could you finish off with giving a little chazanus? His wife is laughing. I know. I ask these questions like it's random. It feels a little awkward to ask it. Maybe it's more awkward to actually do it. But if you don't feel comfortable, that's fine.
I'll try. Okay. I'll think which chazanus. Okay. I'll give a bit of chazanus. Shall I start?
Yeah, sure.
Oy vey mi mekoy mecho malkeinu soifia mi mekoy mecho malkeinu soifia v'siyim loich oleinu ki mechahakim anachnu loch oy Mosai timlo choleinu oy mekaro meyameinu le'olam moed oy Tiskadal, Vesiskadal, Oy Mesoich Yerushalayim Ircha Redoir Vadoir Ulenetzach Netzachim Ve'yeveinu Seyireveno Oy Mamal Chuvusecha Kahadava Hamu b'shirei uzecha ahal yedei David Mashiach tzidkecha.
That was really beautiful. Thank you.
Well, I think I made one error there.
I did not notice.
Void. I said void. That's a Tishkon.
Okay, we're going to do this again. No, okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming out. I know you weren't in New York for a very long time, so I appreciate the time with you.
Well, I appreciate you interviewing me, so thank you very much indeed. I was honored to be interviewed.
Thank you. Thank you so much for watching or listening to this week's episode. If you got this far in YouTube or Spotify, go ahead and leave the comment SOUL, S-O-U-L, so the rabbi knows that you got this far and I could show him, Rabbi, look at all the comments of people saying how much soul you're full of. Or leave your favorite moment, leave your favorite aspect of the rabbi or how he runs his community in the show notes. And let me talk about last week's episode. So many of you listened to the episode. A lot of you listened to the episode and was asking what happened to his abuser. It's a question that I didn't ask, and it's obvious that I didn't ask it. And I spoke to Penny before, and he felt uncomfortable with us talking about it, not particularly because of the abuse that went on, which I'm sure there's a factor of that, but it's also, he said his episode, it's not about him. It was about him, but it was more he wanted to represent people who are abused. Unfortunately, not everyone could speak up, and that makes sense. And not everyone's comfortable, and it's not that everyone should speak up, but Penny wanted it kind of to represent everyone, and he felt if we got too detailed in his story, which we got pretty detailed with this story, then it would lose some validity. But I spoke to him, and he allows me to reveal, as he did in the comments, that his abuser was obviously fired from being a Rebbe and was excommunicated from the Hasidic community. I hope he didn't move to Perth. I don't know where he's living right now, but he's totally excommunicated, and anyone who knows who he was before, they have nothing to do with him. And I think it's a little sad that he's not taken to court. And obviously, I think everything was done in order that they could take care of him. But Hashem runs the world. But it's so important. But back to our sponsors. When you go ahead and you help our sponsors, you help this podcast thrive and live and go. I traveled for this podcast, not for this episode, not to Australia, but I traveled to the city. The person who connected me with this interview probably doesn't want me telling people about him, so I know him. There's no way. So thanks to person, I'm not even gonna say his initials, people figure it out. So if you support our sponsors, you help me go out and travel and do these kind of things. So go ahead, please go listen to the Kiddush Club. Listen to one episode. It is such a fun time. And go ahead and check out Good Faith Effort Podcast. So many things here that we do at Living L'Chaim we can't even do with like how Good Faith Effort does it. It's so similar but so different, and Rivari is an incredible host, and Kiddush Club hosts are also incredible. Check out both of those podcasts. If you haven't yet bought Twillery, I don't know what you're waiting for, and I don't know why I've become like the poster child for people WhatsApping me questions. The pant sizes, you can find it on the website. You could ask me also, I'll guide you, but ask me about the button downs and the fit, and go ahead and use the code INSPIRE. When you get Twiller, you get $18 off. And also, last but not least, go ahead and go to mosaicapress.com to order the book Beginnings by Rabbi Haber. It will transform your life. You obviously use the code L'Chaim for 18% off, LCHAIM. And if you enjoyed this episode, Rabbi Freilich is someone that isn't, famous celebrity or Gadol Hadar that spoke by the Sima. He's an amazing person, but I think particularly these are the kinds of Yidden that we need to do episodes about, and we want you to know about, and we want your help sharing this with the people that should know about them. Until next time, you can be an inspiration for the nation. That sounds so cheesy. Kurt Bacher is gonna kill me. Okay, L'Chaim. Living L'Chaim.